The tape is part of an oral history program at the Newton Free Library. The subject is a history of crafts and tradespeople in Newton, Massachusetts, from 1920 to 1950. This interview is with Joseph Antonellis of 194 Adams Street in Nonantum, a village of Newton. The interviewer is Francis Hutchins of the Newton Library. The interview takes place at the home of Mr. Antonellis on Wednesday evening, March 18, 1981. Mr. Antonellis is a painter and writer who has been a resident of Newton since 1924. Can you tell me something about your parents, about when they came to the United States?
Yes, as far as I can understand, they came, I think, right after World War I, probably 1919 or 1920. And if I recall, my father originally settled in Worcester, but for some reason, he did come back to Quincy, where my aunt lived, my mother's sister. And she was a widow with a daughter, a very young daughter. My father was a widower with a young son. And I guess they met there, and they married in Quincy. They lived in Worcester, if I recall, only for 2 or 3 years. Then they moved to Newton, primarily, I think, because of the economic situation as a job there, because he was a bricklayer, and a very good bricklayer at that, too. And they settled here in Nonantum and bought a little house on West Street, which was only 4 rooms, 4 rooms, a kitchen, and a living room, and 2 bedrooms. He, in the course of a few years, built a bathroom by himself with the aid of friends. But it was a crowd situation because there were three girls, 3 sisters, and 3 brothers. The boys slept in the living room. The girls had their own room upstairs. My mother and father had their room. And I recall, only being very young, that it didn't strike me as we were overcrowded, because I don't think you would think about those things when you're young anyway. And it was a happy home. And I remember going to the Stern School. These are the first, more or less, vivid memories you have. And it didn't seem to be a great gap between the languages, because we did speak all Italian at home. And going into the grammar school, at the time, it didn't strike me as being an overwhelming thing. I listened to a different language and almost a different culture. But I do recall an awe that something was amiss here. But like I say, at that age, who could really analyze the situation here? But I never found it difficult. As a matter of fact, I was always in the top bracket of my classes, whatever grades I was in. I recall they had report cards like, not we have later on, but the report cards were only 1 sentence. Where the teacher would say, Joseph is doing well in all subjects, or doing bad in certain subjects, and so forth. And I always recall just the very exquisite penmanship of the teacher, and most of them were all females, where she would write, Joseph is doing well in all subjects. And that used to make me feel good about that. And it was the young sort of a life we had. The Charles River played an important part. It was the first place to learn how to swim. And my mother was horrified at water for some reason. Perhaps back in her younger days she was frightened by the ocean or something. But anyway, being a blonde, which is sort of rare usually in the Italian heritage, but there are in my family blondes, redheads, but anyway, being a blonde, the giveaway, you go swimming and actually your hair would bleach out. And I never realize that. Now my mother would look at me and say, "You went to the water today." Oh, no, I wouldn't. And I'd get a slap. And I couldn't understand how she would find out. I figured someone was either squealing on me or, telling tales at school, until one of the brighter friends of mine says, "You fool, your hair turns white from the sun." So, being not very bright, I decided still going swimming and getting a bunch full of dirt and put it on my head. When I got home, she said, "Look how dirty your hair is," and I got another beating. But I was little small picadillos like that. We had our gangs. We played certain games. But I recall, which is unusual today, the use of profanity was hardly ever even done in the schools. And never at home. I mean, you wouldn't dare speak of profanity at home because strictly in Italian families, the males were always superior and they were waited on by the females. But there also was a connection to it. You had to play the part of the, well, for want of a better word, what they use today, chauvinistic male. You had to play the part of the male, be the leader. And so we had a sort of, should I say, a mastery over our female sisters and mother, too. They could go so far in intimidating us, and we'd always get the last word. But like I say, there was a hitch to this sort of an environment where you had to be mastered. If you deviated, the punishment was not just silence, but an ostracism that you don't get today, which fed your male ego tremendously. Yet you never overwhelmed the female, because that was something that would put you out of character, because a female was considered a lady. And there were certain things you do. You look at today as almost a carryover from the feudal days, probably, or even a poor Southern aristocracy,
kind of putting her on a pedestal.
Exactly, you see. And the pedestal worked in a sense that it made us very... I remember in grade school that if you deviated from the norm, you got punished by being called into the principal's office, putting out your hand and getting the rat hand. And it hurt. And when you come back in class, if you were male, you didn't dare shed a tear. Because if you did, you get the mockery and the sneers of your male compatriots and the snickers of the females. So you may have gotten to class and you were hurting and you wanted to burst in tears, but the stiff upper lip, the play acting came in and you just sat down and took your lickings. This made you a hero because you didn't cry. Which again, like I said today, it's gone. I remember suddenly things becoming different. And of course now I realize it was the Depression. And my father, who was seldom at home because he'd always be working, would always be home. And the whole atmosphere changed in a sense. There was more silence in the home. And the verbal give and take, the laughter between my mother and father was strained. She, with the idea, who had to run a home with very meager pay, if any at all. And my older sister had to drop out of school, I think it was in the 7th grade, and she went to work in a factory. And for years, well, I'd say for 3 or 4 years, she was the only source of income, until my father had to get on to WPA. Oh, the only thing he did was on WPA.
This was before the 30s then? I mean,
this was in the 30s.
This was in the 30s,
of course.
Yeah.
Because the 2nd grade, it was 1932, and that was the height of the Depression. You see, the recollections I can see, I can't recall ever going to kindergarten. I don't think I ever did go to kindergarten. I remember 1st grade, and like I say, my mind is very vivid. I remember things way back, but I don't recall. It's a perfect blank. No such thing as kindergarten. And I don't think I ever went to kindergarten. Perhaps it was an age bracket that I probably exceeded the bracket to go into the kindergarten. Was much older, say a year older, so we're right into the first grade. But I remember the second grade. I remember going to the movies. At one instance, when I was very, very young, and I recall seeing an apparition on the screen, but then it followed lettering, which was the dialogue. So I account for that as being sound, because I would have remembered sound. But then that's the only thing I remember. But I remember in '32 seeing the Marx Brothers, and a favorite of mine, which I carried all through the years, Norma Shearer, which is almost a strange movie star to... I remember her very vividly. She was perhaps the first female I fell in love with on the screen, you know. She was so lovely I could have walked to the end of the world with. But I remember that. But I remember how, like every American, I enjoyed the movies for the simple fact it was a different world. It was an escapism. It was a way of living vicariously, as we all do in the movies, but especially at that time, because that, I wouldn't say complete unhappiness, but that strain was noticeable because of the Depression, which I imagine every middle class and lower middle class family felt during the Depression anyway. And I recall afterwards, my first job was delivering groceries at the local store, which was run by an Italian immigrant, and mostly the customers were Italian. And I recall that was my special world. There was no other world, even though I lived next door to a Jewish family who owned a junkyard, and another Jewish family across the street, and there was well, I say Jewish American, I should say. And there was also in the block French Americans, but there was no great gap between us. There was a gap in the religious attitudes, because I would see the rabbi come down on the high holidays, and Mrs. Schreiber, who lived next door, would call me to light her gas and do little things that they couldn't do on, especially on Passover. I guess they couldn't use any manual labor. And for my reward, she'd give me a penny and 3-4 pieces of matzah, crackers, I guess it was. And I recall how, well, I thought it was stale, but they weren't stale because they had no leaven, they had no salt in them, and they were tasteless. And you form impressions. You form impressions as saying that they must have lived in a very austere world, but they were no different than our Lenten period at the time, or our fasting. And I would ask questions, which I probably was too young to ask questions. Why was their religion different? Because, you see, I know nothing about Protestantism, because mostly we were all Catholics here. And the Jewish religion, even though it's a cleavage as far as being Christ and the Messiah, it had so much in common. And as I say, I never knew the outside world existed outside Nonantum. I don't imagine any youngster does at that age, too, just his own surroundings. The furthest I would remember going is walking to Watertown Square with my parents to get on the trolley cars to go to Quincy, where my aunt lived. And, of course, I always thought, when I was very young, that we crossed over the bridge, I knew it was the Charles River. But I didn't realize as you went up the street with the trolley car, there was an opening, a little hill that went off Watertown and hit the Charles River on the opposite end of the winding river. I thought that was the ocean. And I said, my God, the world must be a different world over that banking way down there, because I realized after it wasn't. And I recall, even though I left Newton to go to Quincy, which is, I think, is about 40 miles away, because I went to an Italian district in Quincy, it was no different, outside of the fact that the main industry of Quincy was naturally monuments, stone cutting, granite. And I associated that with a fact that it was been an awful city because people died there. Not realizing, of course, they die everywhere. But I saw so many cemetery stones in different shops, men cutting and making them, and most of my cousins were stone cutters. Matter of fact, my uncle was, and he died of tuberculosis because of the dust from the stone collected in his lungs, and that was the hazard they had, and the number of deaths attributed to the dust in a lot of my relations and cousins there was because of that dust killing. And that was, as far as my childhood, I remember my father was very lovable. And he wasn't the typical tyrant that the prototypes that you have in the movies when they show Italian Americans, which makes me infuriated, which I imagine would make an Irish American infuriated because they make caricatures of all the nationalities, because it isn't. And all you see in America, the American who are not as Italian American, they're all mafia, because we never knew what mafia was, or Sicilians or anything else. That's, it does good in pulp magazines. As a matter of fact, I detested The Godfather for the simple reason I don't think it was the truth. I think some of it, a lot of it probably was, but it was done in a fashion to excite, to entertain, to exaggerate. And those who are not probably very discerning or could care less because it's just a movie wouldn't look at this subject, and it does a demeaning effect on Italian Americans, which is not actually the truth, any more than you say that the Irish in their fight, that they're all seen fine, or they're all northern or southern Republican and terrorists, which they're not. Half of them could care less, but that isn't the impression you give. And I remember most of the fathers were predominant. They still carried over from the old Latin Roman culture that the father was supreme, the first son was second in command, and so forth. And the father owed his allegiance to the city to the state, and the state to the nation. That kept my family very above level, even in the hardest time, because he was the key man. My mother, perhaps like all females, would turn his head, but very, very sotto voce, in fact. She would do it very, very nicely. And but he was still given the command, even in the higher times. And I remember very young meeting a Yankee family where the female, as I recall, was very intolerant. And I used to say to myself, I can't understand why he doesn't turn around and tell her or put her in her place. But never knowing the ways of the world, I couldn't understand that. But in the Italian families, there were the men, and even if they were disreputable, even if they were loafers, he was still a man, and his allegiance. Only if he acted in an unmanly way was he ostracized, but then still given the chance to regain his stature, which I found out later is not the case in many ways. But it was very hard. I recall that with a sense of, I think it was the happiest time, which is probably incongruous when you think of the Depression and the economical. That's why economy and the lack of money has never bothered me, because we never did have it. And when we didn't have it, it seemed as though that the distress made us closer, and we were much happier. And what we did get for gifts, which were absolutely nothing in today's world, meant so much for us. I remember one time getting from someone, I can't remember, a box that contained the colors of the spectrum with a brush and 5 sheets of paper. And there was a note written in Italian, which I had translated. I couldn't afford the book to color. Use your imagination.
What does that say? How do you say that in Italian?
I could, you said I have to probably paraphrase it, but I would say, i soldi, the money, giusta, is not there. Bands, Aichi use your own brains, or use your brains. So I did that, and I would make, and I remember being fascinated by it. And I remember going from there with pencil and sketching. And I recall, as far as the writing, I was utterly fascinated one Thanksgiving by the Pilgrim Fathers. And I went up to the local library and I got a very short book on the first Thanksgiving. And I think it was on a level probably of 10th grade level, I imagine, the seriousness of the content of it. Because I couldn't understand too much of it. This was in the second grade, and I wanted that book so much. And to show you how we were in dark, we couldn't take what didn't belong to us. Not only told by the church, but also our parents, you did not steal. Whatever anyone else possessed was not yours. So I couldn't steal the book, which I thought of as being a youngster. And I couldn't think of it, because morally the devil was back. I said, oh my God, I'll be damned into hell to my parents. So, the book was nothing, actually. But so I took it home, and I bought a nickel pad, when I don't know where I got the nickel from, and I copied it word for word from the book.
The whole book?
The whole book. It was only about, I'd say about 30 pages. But I copied the whole, because I wanted that book. And of course, I didn't know the vocabulary because it was way beyond my level of education at the time. But I remember reading it, and afterwards, when I was in the 9th grade, I read it, and I said, what a childish book, because it didn't, it was way beyond. But at that time, I was fascinated by it. I was fascinated by words and how they manipulate. And I was fortunate in one of the grades, and I forgot what it was, that for a gift, a teacher gave me a dictionary. And of course, to have books in my home, my mother read an awful lot, but they were all Italian romances. She was a very romantic person. She would go to the movies once or twice in her life that she went during those days. Afterwards, she would go. As long as she wept, the movie was good. But she came home one day and she was grumbling. So I asked her what had happened. She'd gone to the movie. She says, the movies. There was a girl with a cigarette in one hand and a drink in the other, because my mother never drank. She says, the word was used, putan, which is translated as whore. I says, oh my, could she have? Well, any girl who would smoke or drink, what else could she be?
Probably Irene Dunn or somebody.
Probably, the nicest person in the world. But you see, a female didn't do that.
Sure.
You didn't drink in public. And, of course, a low gown. Because, don't forget, my mother came from a very small village that I visited a few times in the last few years in Italy. That most of them were on the mountains in I'd say probably just below Rome. Above Naples, probably in what they do call the southern part of Italy, where most of them were farmers or sheep herders in the mountains. Beautiful climate, exquisite, the blue sky of Italy, no one has it but the blue sky of Italy. And the foliage is magnificent, the air, but it's feudal. Meaning that the same buildings that they live in 500 years ago were standing and are standing today. Maybe you probably noticed in the papers when they had the earthquake, it's the same idea, the villages wiped them right out. And of course, the customs handed down by people who believe more in custom than they do in a sophisticated world. They believe strongly in their faiths. They believe strongly at not knocking authority. Of course, this is all changed in our modern era, but up at that time, they still carried it. You don't knock authority. You may grumble. They didn't realize how they were held down by the authorities, that they were just peasants, but they were happy in their lives. I had a remark made by a cousin of mine who came from Italy, a boy only 20-odd years old. He doesn't have a university education. He's a normal secondary high school education. And I had asked him, now that he had lived here for a year, would he go back to Italy to live or would he stay here? And he said, I'd like to go back to visit. He says, I like being here because there's more opportunity for making money. He says, but I miss that life. And he made a startling observation from this boy who was not a philosopher, and I don't think is a deep thinker, but he said to me, it's money, money, money here. He says, you know, you Americans, when you die, you don't even know you lived. He says, your pursuit of the dollar takes up all your time. He says, back in the old country, we worked. But we had time when we worked to go to the mountains, to hike, to ski, to enjoy ourselves. Here it's constant, constant. If it isn't constant, you'll worry when the next bill to be paid, the escalating prices. We didn't have anything there. We had anything, everything. And I couldn't help but think of that and thinking of my own childhood as far as the money part. Of course, I have realized that I had no deadlines to meet, no money to pay, and I was being coddled by a mother and father at that age, being taught in school. But I had no responsibility, so why should I worry about money? I can understand that. But I'm saying that I wasn't pressed upon by them, always saying there was no money. My mother would do the same thing. And she said one time when I was 7 years old at the YMCA in Newton Corner, I won a medal for being first in the swim meet. And I came home and looked, I had won the Congressional Medal of Honor, and I was ecstatic. And my mother looked down at me, and I says, Mama, I won a medal. She says, that's very nice, but it won't feed you. And now, in today's psychology, that would be, I should say today's 10-cent psychology, that would be a horrible way of treating a boy. It wasn't. She told me that, yeah, you want something, but isn't that important? There are more goals to go after. And you know, and I remember being a little bit crushed, but well, I said, it didn't bother me. I recall these things, looking back, amused, because I try to apply that with the psychology of today, and I should have been all just torn to pieces, which I was not. What I'm trying to say here is that the atmosphere in the house was such that they tried in their own subtle and very intelligent way, not an educated way, because they weren't educated to that degree, but their natural intelligence made us feel important. And I appreciate that today. Very, very much I appreciate it. Up to there, I remember things were getting harder, and then I more or less began to realize how hard they get, because I had to find work. And I love to play sports, but I had to push that aside many times. From the grocery store, I loved with that. I became a caddy. And I remember my older brother saying to me, when the man says to you, how old are you? You tell him 13. I was only 10. So when I walked up, he said to me, how old are you, kid? And I says, 13. He looked at me with his eyes, says, you big lie. He says, carry that bag. The bag was bigger than I was. But I think in the 7 years that I caddied, I think was the happiest part of my life. I learned how to play golf. I was outdoors half the time. And most of the fellows I golfed, caddied with, were neighbors, some of them. But a lot of them were from West Newton, Newton Corner, of different background, Irish, English, all but Jewish. And the Jewish, I found out later on the reasons why. But anyway, to go back.
Where was it that you caddied? Where
In Woodland Golf Club. It's up at Albandale this year. I remember the big cleavage came at the introduction of the junior high school. Prior to that, in about the 6th grade, there was a grammar school up in Craft Street that we would travel up to and get slips when things, I think it was about 35, when things were really bad. And you would get doled out the basic sugar, I think it was sugar and grapefruit and butter. Those you would get free to, because like I said before, prior to my father getting on a WPA, you would get that. But I remember because my father owned his house, we were restricted. And you could only get something, I don't know, you could even, like my mother made the statement, am I supposed to eat the house?
But the idea was that you were property owners, and therefore
owners.
you
Therefore,
could afford.
you could afford it. But you know, when there's nothing coming. But I'll say one thing: that most of the people who were the authorities are in charge of the welfare were kind people. They try to do their job with limited amount of money, and they cared. Which I look back and I appreciate. I don't find that today. I think most of these people who are on welfare organizations, where they deal with the colored situation, or the poorer whites, or even people who are disadvantaged as far as physically mental, I think more of them is a prestige. It's a badge that tells them I'm a have a doctorate or something. I don't think they care. I think they quibble over money, which is a natural ingredient, but there's more to it as a personal giving which they don't give. And it's unfortunate, but that's another story. But anyway, up until the 7th grade, I didn't know the world was cut into two camps of the haves and have-nots. And Newton being the city, I remember seeing the garden city. Now we started at Nonantum because everybody around here had gardens. I remember our yard was a tremendous garden. We had 3 pear trees, 1 gigantic apple tree, 2 peach trees in the front. We had every vegetable from sunflowers, if you can call that a vegetable, cucumbers, tomatoes, you name it. Also, we had a vineyard of black and white grapes.
Did your father plant all of that?
All these were planted. They were all planted. I think perhaps the apple tree was there. It was an old, because that rotted after a few years. We had to cut it down. But that was a huge tree that must have been there for years, probably 100 years for all we know. I remember one startling aspect. I remember digging in the garden one day, and I dug a big hole because I heard somebody talking about you find treasures. I did find a treasure. It was a Civil War pistol. But it was all rusted, and I made the mistake of saying it to the whole gang, and somebody stole it and never saw it again. But I remember digging it up, and I thought, oh, my God, because it had marked on it clearly on the barrel, even though it was nicked and was all rotted, 1862. So later on I figured that wasn't the height of the Civil War. Probably some old Yankee had, who knows. But and I dug again, and I couldn't find anything. But I remember they were all over the neighborhood. And we would steal somebody else's orchard, I mean, which was foolish. But the idea was, ours wasn't that bad. Let's go and steal somebody else's. But everybody, and today, unfortunately, they're all garages with broken down cars, and no more. And I think my father would just turn over in his grave if he saw it. But then, that's progress. But the big cleavage did come after being with mostly neighborhood kids. And they were Irish kids and Jewish kids and French kids and Italians. I don't think there was no such thing as Polish kids around here that I recall. But those categories, but don't forget that mostly all Catholics outside the Jewish, which we thought was close, the same thing to ours. Going to the FA day, you would use the word traumatic today, but it wasn't traumatic. It was a different change. It was like suddenly being washed with bleaching water instead of a seductive smelling soap. It stung. And I finally was capitulated into a society where people were wealthy and people taught differently than you were in religion and other things. It was startled me. And I don't think anyone in my capacity, being the person I am, and I would be honest about it, it stunned all of them too, but they don't say anything about it.
This was the transition
The
from
transition
elementary
period,
to
from
junior
elementary
high.
to junior high school, where Newton, as I was going back, the reason why I brought up the gardens in this neighborhood, it was called the Garden City, and I thought to refer to Newton because everybody had a garden, but it's a different sort of a garden, like an English garden, you know, the English country garden, where the homes are tremendous near the side. But I hadn't gone up to there since, before. Now, I caddied in junior high school, not before. And suddenly, they categorized group 7A to 7E, and eliminated F because that sounded like a failure. But as you progressed, your level of speed, I wouldn't say intelligence, but your level of speed in grasping the roots of the education, if you were quick and did your work, in contrast to the kid who wouldn't pay attention and was slower. Not that he was non-intelligent or stupid, it was far from the case. There was a case of being slower or quick. And the quicker kids are naturally in the A, B, and C division in 7th grade. Well, I was put in the B, and there was no one else in my B division from my neighborhood. And I suddenly realized all these other kids looked different in their clothes, different in their manner. Not all of them, but most of them were rather reserved and quiet, and they did just look at me as though I was a total stranger. But luckily for me, it was characteristic of me of not shying away, but trying to meet the opposition. This, I believe, is a reason why I was strong, was a fact of my home life, because the mayor was told to be aggressive and not to be effeminate, being a fat, being soft. I couldn't afford to be soft. Although we're told to be quiet, which is also another thing that's not very characteristic of what you see in the movies about Italian Americans. They're usually loud and brash, which is far. I remember one time in the Navy, one of my buddies in the Navy says, "My God, look at this guinea with the English accent." Couldn't understand it. And so reserved, they couldn't understand that at all, because to them, you know, an Italian American brash and loud like you see in movies, which was not the case. And I suddenly realized when they said the Lord's Prayer, instead of at the ending, lead us not to evil, we would say amen. They added a little postscript that said, "For thine is," and I looked, I said, "Well, that isn't the way it's said." But I didn't say anything. And I suddenly stunned. I remember asking the nun, that's the Protestant way of doing it, and don't ask questions. And I said, "Protestant," because natural religion was never taken up in school, where I in public school. And I looked up the word in the dictionary, and it was rather vague, but I noticed it broken down, and it was protest, and they're protesting against something. But it stuck in the back of my mind. I didn't think anything of it. I wonder why they would, protest anything. I think they're going to be living mortal sin, because we're taught this sort of things in even Sunday school. But the big cleavage was to walk and see a youngster that I heard them say, it cost me $45 for my ski boots. I remember being startled. My father was making $13 a week on the WPA, and this kid had a pair of shoes that cost $45. I was startled, I couldn't even think. And I remember looking at the kid and looking at his shoes, still start. And I noticed what I had was hand-me-down clothes these kids had. I'm saying this because it's the reason in the city of Newton how the big cleavage between the wealthy and the poor was there. There's no question about it. We were lower middle class, and these were high middle class, way above, well-to-do middle class. But yet, nothing was ever demeaned. Even my teachers would never. I joined in all the studies. All the activities were open to me. Even in the schools, the only cleavage was that we took a brown bag lunch, which they call today, where they ate in the cafeteria because their parents gave them money. Well, we couldn't. We would get food from home. And all the poorer kids, those with the cleavage, they would eat in the gymnasium, and the richer kids would eat in the cafeteria, where the teachers ate. And that beginning, the social cleavage began there. You could sense it. Even though they didn't show it, it was there, and there's no question about it, and you felt it. Such things as the F.A. Day would beat every other junior high school in sports, and all of these 3 or 4 junior high schools would merge into the main Newton, and there was no 2 schools, just plain Newton High School. They never made the first team. Only the Yankees did. Unless you were extremely good, and they couldn't, which some of the kids were, they couldn't. And this hurt. And this hurt also in many other aspects, because when it came to a question of those who could afford it would go to the university because there's no question of funding them for a scholarship. And unless the boy was an extremely bright boy, he would get a chance to go in. But otherwise he couldn't. And there's no question about that. I mean, I'm not saying that to out of anger. It's just reality, which is found in every economic society. I mean, you just can't be it. You just can't do it. But I sort of always felt that handicap, and I think that every kid feels that handicap when he is poor and he has to go up against say a group of children or adults who have wealth and have better opportunities. I don't think he should crawl before it and snivel. I don't think it's even a handicap. I think that it's an adversity that should be overcome, and you can be overcome. I don't think money, position, makes the character. I don't think there's anything for him. I think it's just the opposite. But it does hurt the psyche. I mean, what the hell, you're only human.
Sure.
And it does hurt because, you know, I wish I had $45. And I was thinking, gee, my mother had $45 a week. My God, what she can do with it. But you learn to live with it.
Just to get back for a minute to the teams, was it a question of the Yanks being better?
Well, no, it wasn't there. I don't know what, let me take, for instance, I remember coaching basketball, and he would make us work and work during practice, and we were always the second team. And when a game came, we'd never play. He'd always put the other kids in. And in those days, it wasn't a question. You had to win, and no, it wasn't that much publicity. They catered more to the youngster to make him to get into the game and play, which is very good. But you know, when you go out for a position, when you go out for any sort of endeavor, you want to win. I mean, you want to be part of the team. And you know, we could never understand why it was we in the F.A. Day would beat Bigelow and Warren, and especially Weeks, where the wealthy came from. We'd beat them in almost everything. And we soccer ball, baseball, basketball would always, you know, win. They would probably lose a few games, but ultimately we'd be always the first team. And yet when we got to high school, where all the junior high schools merged, we never seemed to make the team. Of course, I'll say that a lot of us had to go to work. We couldn't make it, but the few that did always get cut. They never could. And perhaps the other kids could take more time into playing. Like I never knew what it was to play hockey because I couldn't afford the skates.
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with
Yeah.
equipment and free time.
And same
and
with
practice.
the ski
Yeah,
team.
Sure.
I couldn't. I mean, who could afford skis? I mean, skates. You had to have your own skates. And that was a territory like a foreign land. I couldn't even jump. So we played basketball instead. But I recall that was the cleavage. And then I remember in the 7th and the 8th grade when they would have parents, business wasn't as big as today. They'd have probably once or twice a year, they'd have a parent night. And my parents would never come because they couldn't speak English. And, but fortunate for me, I was, well, not always an A student, but, you know, either an A and a B. And as I told you, one time they wanted to know what the transition period was. There was no transition period because I think when you're very young, you're like a sponge. You pick up everything, and nothing is inside to confuse your mind. So you retain, if you can retain things, you retain the English language, like the same with the Italian language. And you become more proficient in English because you speak it more and you read it, and you neglect the Italian only to answer whoever speaks to you in their dialect.
Sure.
But for me to, at that time, to say I could speak, read, and write Italian, the same equivalent as English, would be false because I couldn't possibly do it. I was very proficient in English instead. But what they failed to realize, even though I told them I was a reader, I liked to read and to investigate, which put me ahead of most of the other kids because most kids wouldn't have wants to read. Either you do like to,
Sure.
or who wants to sketch.
Yeah.
And I believe, like in talent, either you have a talent or you don't have. You can't cultivate a talent. You can't. You can go to the best universities and still not know how to write
Sure.
or paint.
When did you start to write?
I'd probably say in the 8th or 9th grade when we came more into reading in school. I remember was in the 8th grade, Evangeline Longfellow, and I loved the idea of rhyming. I remember asking her, when did they start rhyming? She says, it's a rather unusual question to ask. She says, do you know when? So in the Middle Ages, and they found out that it sounded better. They would rhyme the words. I said, a beautiful idea. He says, because you don't read poetry, you sing it in the iambic meter or a tetrameter, whatever it is, you sing it. And actually, if a good reader, he sings. He doesn't read poetry. There's a method to it. But anyway, this is what not that I can say I was the oddball because I would read and paint and the others didn't. But I never considered myself different because I loved sports. I loved playing like ordinary boys. I didn't, I wasn't a bookworm where I shut the windows and I have to read. I would just read. And I would sketch. And I remember in the 7th grade, they had a contest. And I've always wondered what happened. But anyway, we had a contest sketching a building that you thought was important in Newton. And I sketched the City Hall.
Okay.
And I remember the teacher telling me it was too difficult. When I picked something, I said, no, that's what I want to do. And she looked at me kind of... and suddenly my sketch was lost. So I lost out in the contest. We don't know. To this day, I don't know what happened, but I remember no names. But I remember her saying to me that it was a very unfortunate thing. Somehow it got lost. So it was no matter.
Once you were giving it to her.
It was lost. So I don't know whatever happened. But someone from the junior high school won. But it wasn't, you see, I didn't, thought lost. I enjoyed doing it. And I've always been, when I try something, if I can conquer it, you can't mess with the rewards where I am satisfied.
Sure.
This, I think, as I went in the 8th grade, and I had unfortunate happening in the 8th grade. Unfortunate, and I don't think it was unfortunate in a sense. It was very sad at the time to me, the kind of punctured my ego. But in the 8th grade, we had to take a course, select either business, trade school, or a college course. So I took a college course. I wanted to go to college. And I remember a teacher calling me in and very bluntly telling me that you have the wrong nationality and the wrong religion. But I was shocked and as you're shocked, but I'm not. And I think that she was a very kindly, very astute, very bright, very intelligent woman at the time. She said to me, why don't you try a business or a trade school? That you'll make a living out of. The other you'll break your heart. And I thought at the time, what an awful thing to make fun of my religion and my nationality, but she wasn't doing that. Now I'm much older, much wiser, can understand it. She was only trying to fit us all out. What they were trying to do is put you in a, well, you can say a cog of society, a segment of society where you could survive. Which if they did that more today, there'd be more survivors. She wasn't being, I thought at the time, she was being very, very cattivo, which is the word in Italian, monstrous. And I hated her for it. I remember saying, how would she deny me something? She wasn't denying me anything. And when I told her my decision was to go into college, she goes, very well. She never bucked me. She said, I want you to realize what you're going to be up against, and you're going to be up against an awful lot. I didn't realize that until I got in high school because the demands that were put on me, I think, were stronger than the kids who had money and knew where they were going. They tried to discourage me, not in a heinous or hateful attitude. They wanted to spare my feelings, and they were correct in many ways, because when it came up for time of scholarship, I never got even an inkling. Was overlooked.
Oh, what, you applied? Or?
Applied, but it was just cast right aside. Not that you didn't have the marks, but where were they going to get the money? Where are you going to be funded for? There were no such things as scholarships today. And the little scholarships you gave you in high school amounted to 100 or 200, and they couldn't go near the place, you know. And as a result, it wasn't defeating. I think when you're young, you're very optimistic, and no matter what blows you get. And I appreciated all the teachers I had because I thought they were the kindest, the most thorough, the more astute, bright, intelligent, and an honor to their professions. And that I would say for 9/10 of them. They never raised once the specter of nationality, ethnic background. They could care less. But they knew if you had a spark, if you loved literature, if you loved art, they loved you for it. And you were one of them.
Just to ask you for a minute about the high school and the course you took, which was a college course, wasn't it? Was this, do you think, one of the reasons you were able to go ahead with the painting and the writing, that you had been such a big thing in your life? Or
No.
No, you would have done it anyway.
I would have done it anyway. I think what they did give me, which is essential, they gave me the tools. I think I would have got the tools my own way in much harder, extremely difficult, my own way, which would have been not as good a good instructor. That's why I think education is so bad today. I think that they are instrumental in giving the youngster tools which they gave us in those days. They gave, you knew what literature, you knew what a language was, you knew what math, because they drilled it into you until you learned, no matter who the hell you were. But today, you get it. You never will get it. Unless you get it at that time, most adults, who the hell reads today? A book, a novel, a good newspaper. Even your college grads, they don't do it anymore. Once they get away from school, that's it. And they maybe pick up a sensational novel, something like that once in a while. But on the whole, they wouldn't know Chaucer from Hemingway or from Joe DiMaggio. They couldn't care less either. But the point is, they gave you the tools. I would have done it anyway, I think. I think it's innate in a person. If he's going to paint, if he's going to write, it's a disease. I wouldn't say disease, but it's a growing molecular system in your body that if you don't do it, you'll burst. And there has to be an outlet. It has to come. You can be sterile for months. Then all of a sudden that whole thing has been just incubated inside. And if you don't do that, express yourself somewhere, you're just going to go out of your mind. It can be something tremendous feeling. It can be an awful. It can lead to mental suicide. That's how strong it is in a person. And unless you have that person, there's no point in me talking about it because you don't understand. You think, well, this guy's crazy. Why bother? I mean, life is bad enough. But that's why I think that you can. I think schooling is tremendous. But they don't even tell you in art school, and we can't teach you how to draw. We can't teach you how to write. That's up to you. We'll give you the tools. This is what a school is being. But when you're young, you don't know these things. And you feel sometimes you're being denied. And I think that every youngster was born in a poor neighborhood or poor segment of society feels he's being discriminated against. And I think that if he's told he's not, he's better off. I think that's what's at the deterrent. It deters these young kids from whether they're black, Hispanic, or that they're always being told you're discriminated. These kids use us for a crutch. And even those who try to help them, they'll be said, you're patronizing me. That's so. If you leave the kid alone, he'll be all right. If he's any kind of a fighter. If he isn't, no matter what you give him, it's one of the way.
Yeah.
He'll find his own way. But I'll say one thing for the Newton schools in the 1930s and the 40s were gems. Yes, you had some teachers who were horrible, but they were so insignificant that just like an old nightmare you forget about. But the majority of them were superlative. And when I think what's going on today, they must be turned over in these dead graves as if this thing could go on. But they helped you, and they found jobs for you, and I appreciated that. And I remember one of the saddest things was leaving high school when I graduated. I loved the atmosphere, regardless of the rich. There was something about that I don't find anywhere else, and I didn't realize until I got out, and I got out in April because I had I had all my marks were up, and I had points so I could go out a few months ahead of time. And the question of going to college was out because I couldn't afford it. So, of course, the war had started the year previous, for 1941. I graduated in 1942. So I went to work at Waltham Watch Factory, and I was a floor boy, where you took a little mechanism of a watch to another part of the factory and back and forth. You just did a very insignificant thing. But the people there were people I could understand. Most of them had a high school education, but there no such thing as going to college. And they talked the language that I knew in my neighborhood, and I got along with them very fine. But this was also people from Waltham all over. This was wartime. And I remember working from 8 to 5, then working from 8 until 9, then working from 8 to 5 on a Saturday, from 8 to 9 on a Saturday, And then I was supposed to go on a Sunday night. I said no. Because all I was doing was going to bed and going to work. And I suddenly realized what happy days I had in school. Because, of course, now I was beginning to become an adult and responsible. Who likes that sort of... I wanted to go back, like all kids wanted to go back. But, I mean, it was nothing, and suddenly I decided, being extremely patriotic at the time, I had to go back. So one night, in my old and devious ways, I was always doing things by myself. I walked to Watertown Square, got on the subway, on the trolley cars, went to the Fargo buildings and took an examination. And unfortunately, I must have been so excited that my blood pressure shot very high. And he says, look, kid, calm down, and we'll call you again. But I didn't realize what they'd done. They sent a postcard to my house telling me for another physical in a week's time. My sisters could read English, although my parents couldn't. And they wanted to know what this, because they were afraid of the draft and the war on, because they worried like I worry about my own children today. And when she found out it was for a physical, like I said before, my mother hated the war, stuff the Navy. Well, she never would sign my papers. My father had to sign. I remember the poor man signing with tears in his eyes. And, you know, but when you're young, oh, what are you worried about that? You never can understand a parent's feelings. And he would just look at me, and I remember my mother saying words that stick in my mind like engraved tears, red like blood. You will never understand until you have children of your own, then God will punish you. Well, those words come back, you know, oh, and I said, my God, how she could say a few words and knock me for a loop, which is what she felt at the time, that I was punishing her, but never. I started to go into the Navy. Anyway, I went into the Navy, and went to boot camp, and I went to radio school, became a radio man. And I went on an LST, which is a landing ship tank, and I went to England. I was overjoyed going to England, because England was Dickens and Thackeray, and the second God I know, Shakespeare, and all those wonderful English writers. I never saw them there. Of course, in wartime you don't. But I loved England. I think England is like New England in many ways. But I like the English attitude. You know, I read one book only a few years ago, which I startled at first, and I smiled. There was a professor at Oxford speaking at 3 or 4. They took all his lectures, and he made a book out of it on literature, admonishing the young would-be writers who they were. In the middle of the book, I stopped and smiled, and I thought at once I was being sarcastic, but he wasn't. He said the English are the true inheritors of the Roman race, not the Italians. Well, when I thought of it, and I try to, and he said how the English are the true inheritors of the Roman supremacy, empire, so forth. Nice smile. You look back, they have the same paterfamilias attitude, where the father is supreme, as they have in their aristocracy now. They had at that time, because this was written back in the 20s, the book was, their whole way of life. And I couldn't help but recall that was how my childhood was. Of course, the monetary value was different. But anyway, in England and watching how the English lived under stress and being the typical Navy man, which I'll not go into, but then I was an invasion of Normandy. And I'll skip over that and come back for 30-day leave. went through the Panama Canal, and I was in the invasion of Okinawa. I think that I don't think of any ship just in my I wouldn't say flotilla, my group that saw action on both fronts.
You sure did.
So we were on both of them.
I wanted to ask you something about when World War II began. Did you have relatives living in Europe?
Yes,
Yeah.
in the village where my parents came from. I never got to Italy, but I remember going back in the 70s and talking about them. And they were caught right right near Monte Cassino. And they told me how the bombs would ricochet off the mountains and it's not the end of the world. And they had to hide their females in the mountain caves so the Germans couldn't get a hold of them. And how some were shot, some were killed, and they lived in their wits, but they starved practically. And they went through the same natural horrors of war that all Europeans did go.
It's hard for your parents.
But,
It's hard for your parents to have.
oh yes, yeah, it was very hard.
Yeah.
And the unfortunate part of it was my father's brother, my uncle, who wanted to come here and settle too, but he couldn't because he was the youngest son and the only son left. And his father says to me, all of them are going, you too? So he came to America. He was in Worcester for a couple of years, but he went back. And he never came to America. But he wanted to come, but because one of them had to stay with the grandparents, of his folks, my grandparents, he stayed. And I think he was the one who wanted to come. He really
wanted to come the most.
The most, you see. Then I get out of the Navy, and I went to BU. And this is a fascinating part of it. I had always wanted to go to college when I was come out of high school. And I was crushed that I couldn't go. But I says, well, what the hell? Like when my English teacher said to me, and he was a great motivating force in my life, he still is. He said to me, I'll give you a certain amount of books and I'll give you the degree if that's what you want. I said, it isn't the degree I want, I just want the knowledge. He said, well, sure. He listed. And when I went to BU, I took up journalism. I lasted 1 year in BU and I just walked away. Walked away because one professor told me, you are wasting your time here unless you're the type that wants a degree behind you and you've got to have that door opening for you. If that's what you want, he says, well, then stay with the rest of them. He says, but I don't think you are. He says, your examination says you scored tremendously high in English and tremendously high in art. He said, what the hell are you doing? You should be in an art school if you want to go to art school. He said, in English, he said, what? He says, I can't understand. He says, you have, he says, now, taken, for instance, in Greek, we had Greek literature. He says, you knew all this. He says, no point in, as a matter of fact, the one, we had to write an essay on the trilogy, Orestes trilogy, and he wanted to publish my paper, but I didn't think it was worth that publishing. It was too, anyway, he liked it so much. And he said to me, you're so advanced, he says, what do you occupy the space for? And the most motivating force, I think, was my English. He says, don't write at all, but now just forget it. He says, don't, because you'll be a flash in the pan. You'll be successful and you'll be a mess the rest of your life. He says, to hell with it. Work on something worthwhile, even if it takes all your lifetime.
Meaning what?
In writing, write good.
Okay.
But don't write, you want trash. He says, I have been approached by many to write stuff that I won't write. I mean, there was a time when my wife was after about 4 or 5 operations, I was almost broke. And I tried it. I couldn't finish it. So it just landed me. And I think all of this stems from my childhood, from the strength my parents gave me. And as I recall them now, between my parents and that one English teacher, they gave me more than if they had laid a plush carpet of money and opportunity, like that kid with $45 shoes. And by the way, he flunked every subject with F's. It's a good thing he had money anyway. But they were the guiding force. And I think in Nonantum, you may say to me, why do you still live in Nonantum? And even my friends say they live in Chestnut Hill, some of them, and some of them live in Natick, and some live in Sudbury, and one lives in Weston, and one has a whole flotilla of real estate down the Cape that I haven't gone to visit it for years, and one wonders why. Not that I just don't care to go down. But I love this neighborhood. It's a source, or there are times I could burn the whole damn place. You know, you'd like everything else. But there's a source of strength over here. And I think that history has proven me right. It isn't a ghetto. I don't like the word ghetto. I think it's a euphemism used by people who would want you to feel compassion and pity, which is a mixture of stupidity in my estimation, because a place to live in, as long as it's clean, if it has love and strength, is more important than a palace that has hatred and selfishness in it. And I found that in I found even my friends who are far wealthier than I am, there isn't that, they don't have what I had at one time, which I like to have at this time, even though your kids today are influenced by outside forces you can't help, and they have to find their own way. But still, like I always tell my kids, if you can find a better place than this, let me know, I'll come with you. But I say that influences my parents, the neighborhood, especially my teachers, and especially the one teacher I had. They told me never give up. I can remember him saying to me, there's only one victor in life, and that's death. Anybody else you can fight. But death has to get you, so go to him very willingly. You have to go to someday. Don't deny him his due, which he wants is your physical body. He said, but you've got a brain. Use it not for money, because prostitutes do that, but use it to please yourself, to give others comfort and aid. And, you know, it may sound very icky today because, you know, they don't have value anything as long as it has a dollar bill to it, it's flashy. But I think that those beatitudes, I call them, those values that they gave us, unless we get them back, there's no such thing as a civilization. I don't give a damn what section you come from, Nonantum or Chestnut Hill. You haven't got it, and we don't seem to have it anymore. We've become so bitter over the fact that we do die. You know, I remember seeing a movie one time, and I was saddened by it because the female died. And I remember my uncle telling me, who loved opera, and he introduced me to opera. He had records of Caruso, and he said, not in a very philosophical sense, he says, but Joe, it's a natural way. You have to live and you die too. He says, you have to die sometimes. Don't be sad about it. Just be happy when you're alive, because if you're going to be dead while you're living, he says, then you make fun of God and the whole... You see, I mean, they were down to the fundamentals, which takes a university to find out, and still they don't even know about it. Yeah. But I only lasted a year in BU because I didn't bother with economics. I found it too boring. I disliked math, which was very rudimentary, because I'd had algebra and geometry, so it was just a review of stuff. And as a result, those were incomplete. But A's in English and Greek and German, in journalism, in literature, with all kinds of marks, superlative, and which I didn't care about, actually. No, I didn't think it was superlative. probably in contrast to the other kids who could care less about literature, was supportive. They didn't put the effort into it. But I made up my decision. I care less for the degree. And I've been malign by it and told I was a fool and perhaps you had made lots of money today had you kept on. I mean, they're welcome to their opinion. That doesn't bother me in the least.
You're probably glad you found out, aren't you?
Oh, yeah.
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 You had the chance to do that.
Yeah. Because, sometimes you put such great store in a goal and you can't see anything but that goal and you ignore the reality of what the goal is. That when you reach the goal and you look and you say, it wasn't what I thought it was. I had everything in mind. This is what it was. And I was in also, don't forget, a lot of the kids, there were many veterans, but most of the kids were high school kids. And I was divorced from them. I wasn't that young anymore. I'd seen too much. And even though I was only, 22, because I went in the Navy. 18, I went through. And these kids were only 19, only 3 years younger than I was. I used to be in the classroom and essays, and there was especially one, it showed up the immaturity. He had told us, and he said that for the homework there was a debate on the radio, and he wanted to listen to Friday night, only a half-an-hour debate, and write one page. And he says there are 4 debaters, 2 pro and 2 con. All I want you to do is give me a paragraph, 4 paragraphs, short ones, on how these men presented themselves and were they convincing. I don't want, he said, I don't want a resume of the debate. I don't want a portfolio of debate. I want nothing about debate. All I want is your opinion of what these people did and were they successful. So I listened to it and I jotted down my comments and hastily on a Sunday night I typed it all up because I'd written passed it on a Monday. To my chagrin, I looked around and I only had 1 sheet of paper and these kids were taking up bound thesis papers, But I looked at the professor and he was white. And when I passed him, he just glared at me and I said, oh boy, I don't know what the hell, I flunked that one. He won. But I remember him saying that he just wanted a car. I said, what the hell, it is that important? That wasn't on Monday. I didn't have him again until class on Wednesday. And he came stopping in. He opened up his big valise and he started taking one and dumping in the wastebasket. He said, I had asked you to give me a comment on 4 men, a paragraph on each with about 5 or 6 lines. I didn't want the resume, and only one goddamn fool in here did it. He says, Mr. Antonellis gave me what I want. The rest of you gave me nothing, and I'm giving you all an F.
How was he glaring at you when you handed it?
Well, he was so mad that when I walked, I just caught the residue of his hay, and I said, oh boy, I'm caught in his mailing too. I don't know what he... But that was it, he says, and I realized, I said, no, these kids, they're kids. There's nothing stupid about them. I know, and I said, I don't belong. How you feel when you say you're in a group of teenage kids and you're part of them, but you're ridiculous. You don't belong with them. Yeah. And that's how I felt, and I felt that, not that you're way above them, that you don't belong in this, you're too far gone in this, it's like being a young kid and you don't belong with these kids, and I said, oh no, this is not for me, so I left. And I had various jobs. I had many jobs, actually. Even picking shovels, hot topping.
This is all before 1950?
1950, yeah. Until I became an accounting, and was very good at it, which is a job I still have. I have it for a reason of my own. I could never, I think it's been inhibited in me, is the fact I have to work for a living. I could not be the Garrett artist in Sponge or be a bohemian. I think this is also a reflection of my childhood, the culture that I learned, and I call it a culture because with the true sense of the word. It's a cultured mannerisms that we inherit from our parents, from our society, which make what we are. And you can give all kinds of excuses, but if it's not there, you cannot get in the university. You cannot get it by valuing manners. It's instilled in you. And it's altruistic. It's something that's part of your character and part of your pride. This is what the Englishman says, you are the inheritors of the Roman ideology. It's a pride of what you are. I could never sponge. To me, work. I wish I had an awful lot. I wish I had to sleep, because I think sleep is the worst thing in the world because it wastes time. You have to, but your body needs it. But it invigorates me. And I ride on the subway. I jot. I always carry a pencil and pad. I jot things down, and it keeps me alive because I think that if you just loaf and try to push a talent, you become stale. And when you become stale, something dies within you. You don't care about it. Because, all joking aside, to write and to paint is hard work. It is, talent is one part of it, but 9/10 of it is sweat, and you sweat. You can write 40 pages one day, read it the next day, and throw it all in the wastebasket as being pure junk. You can start a painting, have 3/4 of it done, and all of a sudden you see your error, though nobody else can see it unless another artist who's going to look at it. And you get your knife out and you scrape it all off and start again. But that isn't fun work. It's disappointing, it's heartbreaking, and you wish sometimes we should never started damn, but you start again. But I think that perseverance that my parents told me and those few teachers that I had was better than gold bullion. Because, to be frank, there were times that were tough. There were times that were tough in the Navy. They weren't the nicest things in the world. And you become very bitter, very cynical. But I'm still optimistic. Even today, there's nothing to be optimistic about. I still think inherent in a man is a basic attitude to live. And the only way you can live is to love and understand. If you can't do that, I go by the credo my father taught me. He said, the two most important things that people want in life, it isn't ambition that's going to give you a lot of money or even a talent that makes you famous. He said, if you haven't got love and respect, you've got nothing. And all your life you'll try to buy it and find it, and you'll be an empty man. If you love what you're doing and you respect yourself for it, he said, you've got everything, because whatever happens, you turn into ashes. What is good remains. What is bad joins all the rest of the dirt around you. You see, and I think this is one of the great things about living in Nonantum, because these people have only one thing left. They don't have had much money, but they have honesty and character. And you find very few people here who went to a penitentiary, or a few that went to jail for minor things. I mean, say, really bad, dishonest cheaters, which I can't say for most of our leaders today, because they've been taught those virtues, and we try to instill them in our kids. Sometimes we're fortunate, but also our kids are with a peer group, and I'm not going to say society, because society is people and people themselves, because if the kid has something his parents have instilled on him, unless probably by a fortune, if he is too weak, then there's nothing you can do for him. But I think that if you instill that, even though he gets in a little trouble, which he will, we all did, You'll rise above it.
Sure.
And this is what I think is so grand about living in a position where you have to fight for everything. I don't mean fight by teeth and shoving and screaming and punching. Meeting an obstacle and doing the best you can with it, with a minimum of tears and self-pity and the rest of it. Because I don't think there's a person in the world who hasn't got a damn problem, hasn't got a heartache. I could care less what his position in life is. They don't have it. And I can understand it and feel sorry for him. And if he's achieved money, that's wonderful. I mean, that's great. But I know that's not the important thing for him.
Hey, that just about sums everything up, don't you?
I think it does.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.